The forest smelled different that evening. Richer somehow, as if the recent rains had awakened something ancient beneath the soil. Damp pine needles cushioned my steps, while droplets from the canopy above occasionally splashed against my face, cold and startling. I pulled my worn jacket tighter around my shoulders, my breath forming small clouds in the October air, as I ventured deeper than I usually dared. Most of the townspeople never came this far into the woods. They clung to their small, safe lives within Highland Falls, a place where generations had been taught to respect boundaries, especially the one marked by the moss-covered stone wall I'd just climbed over. My grandmother would have been horrified. She'd spent years drilling the warnings into me. The deep forest belongs to them, Evelyn. They tolerate us because we stay on our side. I touched the small silver pendant hanging at my throat, my grandmother's final gift before she died. A simple wolf etched into tarnished metal. Respect them, she'd whispered, pressing it into my palm, but never forget they are wild at heart, no matter how human they may seem. I'd nodded, though I'd never actually seen one of them in human form. Few in town had. They kept to themselves, these werewolves who ruled the vast territories beyond our modest human settlement. I wasn't supposed to be here, stepping over their invisible borders, trespassing where humans were forbidden. The council meeting tonight had made that abundantly clear. I'd sat in the back of the town hall, practically invisible as always, listening to Mayor Donovan's dire warnings about increased wolf activity. His voice had trembled slightly when he'd mentioned rumors of a new Alpha King, one more powerful and less tolerant than his predecessor. The treaty has kept us safe for generations, he'd reminded everyone, his jowls quivering with each emphatic word. But treaties are only as strong as the respect shown by both sides. No one had bothered to ask my opinion. Why would they? I was just Evelyn Morris, the quiet librarian who lived alone in her grandmother's cottage at the edge of town. The invisible woman who spoke to books more comfortably than people, the strange one with the too pale hair and odd, amber-flecked eyes that made people look away uncomfortably. I existed on the periphery of Highland Falls, just as the town existed on the periphery of the werewolf kingdom. The weak whimpering sound nearly stopped my heart when I first heard it. I froze, my body instantly alert to the possibility of danger. It came again, not threatening, but pitiful. Something small and in pain. I followed the sound off the narrow deer path I'd been traveling, pushing through a tangle of blackberry bushes that tore at my clothes and scratched my hands. In a small clearing, barely visible in the fading twilight, I found them. 3 tiny wolf pups huddled together against the hollow base of an ancient oak tree. Even to my untrained human eyes, they were clearly not normal wolves. Their bodies were slightly larger than regular wolf cubs should be, their fur richer and more varied in color patterns. 2 were a deep russet brown, while the third, the smallest, was nearly black, with a single white marking on his chest. "Oh," I whispered, dropping to my knees a few feet away. The smallest one raised his head and whimpered again. All 3 looked malnourished, their small sides heaving with each breath. "Where is your mother?" I scanned the clearing nervously. A mother wolf, especially a werewolf, would never abandon her young unless something terrible had happened. I remembered the whispers in town about increased hunter activity, despite it being expressly forbidden by the treaty. Some humans, it seemed, couldn't resist testing boundaries. I should have turned back then. Should have reported this to someone with authority. Instead, I shrugged off my backpack and reached for the sandwiches I'd packed for my solitary dinner. "Are you hungry, little ones?" I whispered, tearing the bread and meat into tiny morsels. It's not much, but it's something. The smallest one, the black pup, crawled forward first, his tiny legs trembling with the effort. His eyes met mine, intelligent, assessing, and most disturbingly, understanding. Not animal eyes at all. "It's okay," I murmured, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. "I won't hurt you." The pup sniffed at my offering, then delicately took it from my fingers. The other 2 watched their sibling carefully before hunger overcame caution, and they too crept forward. I fed them bit by bit, careful not to give too much too quickly. They were desperately hungry but still weak. "What happened to you?" I asked softly, knowing they couldn't answer but unable to stop myself. Where is everyone who should be protecting you?" The wind shifted suddenly, and the pups froze, their ears perking up simultaneously. The hair on the back of my neck stood up seconds later as a low growl vibrated through the clearing, a sound so deep and threatening it seemed to resonate in my very bones. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, to find myself staring into the eyes of the largest wolf I'd ever seen. He stood at the edge of the clearing, a massive creature with silver-gray fur that seemed to absorb the fading light. His shoulders alone were level with my chest, even though I remained kneeling. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. Midnight blue, intelligent, and burning with a cold fury that was unmistakably human in its intensity. The Alpha. It could be no one else. I should have cowered, should have shown submission or fear. Instead, something in those intelligent eyes sparked defiance in me. "They were starving," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Someone had to help them. The great wolf's growl deepened, and behind me, I heard the pups whimper and shuffle back against the tree hollow. The Alpha took a step forward, his massive paw pressing into the soft earth, leaving an imprint that could easily cover my entire hand. This close, I could smell him. Pine and earth and something wilder, like ozone before a storm. "I meant no disrespect," I continued, still holding his gaze, though every instinct screamed to look away. But they needed help, and no one was here. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that a human would dare speak to him this way. For a moment, the clearing was utterly silent, save for the rapid beating of my heart and the soft whimpering of the pups. Then the air around him seemed to shimmer and distort, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. I gasped as his form began to change, bones cracking and reforming with sickening sounds that made my stomach lurch. The transformation took less than 30 seconds, yet it felt like hours as I watched fur recede, limbs elongate, and features shift from wolf to man. Where the wolf had stood now knelt a man, naked, powerful, and radiating a barely contained violence. He rose to his full height, well over 6 feet of corded muscle and predatory grace. His hair retained the silver gray of his wolf, though it was streaked with darker shades of black near his temples. His face was all hard angles, high cheekbones, strong jaw darkened with stubble, and those same midnight blue eyes now set in a human face but no less wild. "You," he said, his voice a rough growl that still held echoes of the wolf, "have crossed into my territory, human. You have touched my brother's children without permission. Give me one reason why I shouldn't tear out your throat where you kneel." My mouth went dry. "Your brother's children?" His lip curled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a human mouth. "My brother and his mate were killed 3 days ago by human hunters. I've been tracking the killers since then. I returned to find..." His gaze shifted to the pups, and something like grief flickered across his features before the mask of rage returned. "And now I find a human feeding them." Perhaps the same human whose kin murdered their parents. "No." The word burst from me with such force that even he seemed startled. "I would never. I didn't know. They were alone and hungry. I was just trying to help." He stalked forward, each movement fluid and threatening, until he loomed over me. "Help? You humans only help yourselves. Your kind has broken the treaty time and again, yet we have shown restraint. But this..." He gestured toward the pups. "This will not stand unanswered." "The treaty works both ways," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "If humans killed werewolves, they should be punished according to our laws. But don't condemn an entire town for the actions of a few. These pups needed immediate help, and I gave it. Would you rather I had left them to starve while justice was being arranged?" He crouched down suddenly, bringing his face level with mine. This close, I could see flecks of silver in his blue eyes, and the faint scar that ran along his right jawline. "What is your name, human?" he demanded. "Evelyn," I answered, refusing to look away. "Evelyn Morris." "Well, Evelyn Morris," he said, my name sounding strange in his deep voice. "You've involved yourself in matters far beyond your understanding. These pups are royal blood, the future of our pack. Their father was my younger brother, which makes them my responsibility now." His eyes narrowed, And you, trespasser, are also now my responsibility." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the evening air. What does that mean? Instead of answering, he turned toward the pups, who had been watching our interaction with wide, frightened eyes. His expression softened fractionally as he spoke to them in a language I didn't understand. Guttural sounds mixed with something that might have been words in an ancient tongue. The smallest pup, the black one, crawled forward and made a soft yipping sound in response. The alpha king listened intently, then turned back to me with renewed suspicion. "He says you were kind, that you spoke gently and fed them slowly." His eyes traveled over my face as if searching for deception, unexpected behavior from one of your kind. "Not all humans are the same," I replied quietly, just as I imagine not all werewolves are the same. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You presume much for someone in your position." He stood abruptly and looked toward the darkening sky. "Night comes. It is not safe for the young ones to remain here." "There's a storm coming," I said, following his gaze to the heavy clouds gathering above. "They need shelter." "Yes." His voice was clipped as he made a decision. "They will return to the Packlands with me." I nodded and began to rise, thinking our strange encounter was concluding. "Then I should get back to town before—" "You misunderstand," he interrupted, his hand suddenly gripping my upper arm with impossible strength. "You're coming too." My heart stuttered. "What? No, I can't. You've seen the royal heirs. You've crossed into forbidden territory. And most damning of all," he added with a cold smile that never reached his eyes, "you've caught my interest, Evelyn Morris. In all my years, I've never met a human foolish enough to feed wolf pups, yet brave enough to look me in the eye afterward. Please," I whispered, real fear finally breaking through my facade of courage. "People will look for me." His laugh was without humor. "Will they? The invisible woman who speaks to books? I watched you at the town meeting tonight. Not one person acknowledged your presence. When I flinched, he knew he'd hit his mark. You will come with me until I decide what to do with you. Consider it payment for your assistance to the pups." Before I could protest further, he released my arm and moved toward the oak tree. With gentle movements that belied his fearsome appearance, he gathered the 3 pups, cradling them against his bare chest. They nuzzled into him, clearly recognizing his scent as kin. "Can you at least—" I gestured vaguely at his nakedness, my cheeks heating despite the dire situation. He raised an eyebrow, looking almost amused. "Modesty, Evelyn, after everything else, that's your concern?" Nevertheless, he nodded toward my backpack. "I believe you have a jacket." With trembling hands, I removed my oversized jacket and held it out. He shifted the pups to one arm and took the garment, tying it around his waist with quick, efficient movements. It barely preserved his modesty, but it was something. "Come," he commanded, already turning away. "We must reach the den before full dark. The border is not safe these days, even for me." He paused, fixing me with those unsettling blue eyes one more time. "My name is Alexander, though you would do well to address me as Alpha or Your Majesty in front of the others." As I followed him deeper into the forest, away from everything familiar and safe, my grandmother's pendant seemed to grow heavier against my chest. Her final warning echoed in my mind. Respect them, but never forget they are wild at heart. I wondered, with each step taking me further from my world and deeper into his, if I would survive long enough to heed her wisdom. The forest grew denser as we traveled, massive trees closing around us like silent sentinels. My feet stumbled over roots and stones, while Alexander moved with predatory grace despite carrying 3 wolf pups. The makeshift covering of my jacket around his waist did little to diminish his commanding presence. Each time I lagged behind, he would stop, turning those piercing blue eyes on me with impatience that bordered on contempt. "You move slowly, even for a human," he observed after I'd tripped for the 3rd time. "Some of us don't have night vision," I replied, breathless from trying to keep pace. The darkness had become almost complete, with only slivers of moonlight penetrating the canopy above. He made a sound somewhere between a grunt and a sigh. "Take my arm," he said finally, shifting the pups to make room. "But be careful not to disturb them. They're finally resting. I hesitated before placing my hand lightly on his forearm. His skin burned hot against my fingertips, as if he carried a fever, though I suspected this was simply the natural heat of his kind. We walked in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds our footsteps and the occasional soft whimper from one of the pups. Why were they alone? I asked eventually, unable to contain my curiosity. Wouldn't there have been others watching them after what happened to their parents? Alexander's muscles tensed beneath my touch. They were hidden for protection. My brother's mate was extremely cautious. She must have concealed them before the hunters found her. His voice grew softer. Elena was always clever that way. She would have died protecting their location. The raw grief in his tone made me glance up at his profile, sharp and unyielding in the faint moonlight. "I'm sorry," I offered. He didn't acknowledge my sympathy. "The storm scattered our trackers. We've been searching for 3 days. A muscle in his jaw twitched. If you hadn't found them." He didn't finish the thought, but his arm briefly pressed against mine. The barest acknowledgement of gratitude. We crested a hill, and suddenly the forest opened before us. A vast clearing spread out below, dotted with structures that resembled a cross between modern cabins and ancient longhouses. Fires burned in stone pits, illuminating dozens of figures moving about the encampment. Some were in human form, others as wolves, and many somewhere in between, half transformed in ways that made my eyes struggle to comprehend. "Wolf's Haven," Alexander said, noting my awe, the heart of pack territory. As we descended toward the settlement, heads began to turn. Conversations halted, movement ceased, and dozens of eyes fixed upon us with expressions ranging from shock to outright hostility. I unconsciously moved closer to Alexander, though he was far more dangerous than anyone regarding me with suspicion. A woman broke from the crowd and rushed toward us. Tall and lithe with copper-colored hair cascading down her back, she moved with the fluid grace all werewolves seem to possess. "My king?" she called. Her voice choked with emotion as she spotted the pups in his arms. "You found them." "Not I," Alexander replied, his tone neutral. "She did." He tilted his head slightly in my direction. The woman turned to me, her green eyes widening as she fully registered my presence. "A human?" she breathed, incredulity and distrust warring in her expression. "You brought a human to the haven?" "She fed them when we could not," he said simply. "Sophia, take the pups to the healer. They're weak but alive." Sophia looked as if she wanted to protest, but instead, she carefully took the pups from Alexander's arms. The smallest one, the black pup, whined and resisted, looking directly at me with those two intelligent eyes. "It's okay," I whispered, surprising myself with how much I already cared for the tiny creature. "You're home now." The pup settled at the sound of my voice, allowing himself to be carried away by Sophia, who threw one last suspicious glance over her shoulder. Alexander turned to address the gathered crowd. "My brother's children have been returned to us," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the clearing. "Let the mourning period for Damien and Elena continue for 7 more days. But tonight, we also celebrate that their legacy lives on." A collective murmur passed through the assembly, and several wolves raised their heads to release haunting howls that echoed through the night. The sound raised goosebumps along my arms, beautiful, mournful, and somehow triumphant all at once. "As for our guest," Alexander continued, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, "she is under my protection until the council convenes tomorrow. No one is to harm her." His fingers tightened slightly, "but neither is she to leave unsupervised." A prisoner, then. The momentary connection I'd felt with him during our journey evaporated. I was still an outsider, tolerated only because of his decree and my accidental role in saving the pups. The crowd dispersed slowly, many still casting curious or hostile glances my way. Alexander guided me toward the largest structure at the center of the settlement, a sprawling lodge built of massive timber and stone, with intricate carvings decorating its entrance. "You'll stay here tonight," he said, pushing open heavy wooden doors to reveal a cavernous great room warmed by a central fireplace, "where I can keep watch over you. In your house?" I asked, suddenly acutely aware that I was alone with the alpha king of the werewolves, in his territory, surrounded by his people. "My lodgings," he corrected, finally untying my jacket from his waist and tossing it to me. "Wait here." He disappeared through a doorway, leaving me alone in the great room. I pulled my jacket back on, taking comfort in its familiar smell, amid the overwhelming newness of everything around me. The walls were adorned with weapons, antlers, and paintings depicting battles and hunts. A massive table dominated one end of the room, with a throne-like chair at its head. Everything spoke of power, tradition, and hierarchy. I wandered toward the fireplace, drawn to its warmth. A stone mantle held what appeared to be family relics, a tarnished silver cup, an ancient-looking dagger, and several carved wooden figures. Beneath them, a painting portrayed a family. A stern-faced man seated beside a regal woman, with two younger men standing behind them. I leaned closer, recognizing Alexander's distinctive features in one of the young men. The other must have been Damien, his recently deceased brother. They shared the same strong jaw and intense eyes, though Damien's hair was darker, his expression gentler. "That was painted 5 years ago," Alexander said, making me jump. He had returned wearing loose-fitting black pants and nothing else, his chest and feet still bare. Before our parents were killed in the territory wars with the Eastern Pax, before I became king, I stepped away from the mantle, feeling as though I'd intruded on something private. I didn't mean to pry. He approached, stopping beside me to look at the painting. "Damien was always the better of us," he said quietly. More diplomatic, more compassionate. He would have made a finer king. His face hardened. "And now human hunters have ensured that will never happen." "I'm truly sorry," I said, meaning it. "But not all humans are responsible. Whoever did this, they violated our laws as well as yours." Alexander's gaze shifted to me, assessing. "You speak as if you understand pack law." "My grandmother taught me some things," I admitted. "She believed in respecting the treaty. She gave me this—" I touched the wolf pendant at my throat. He reached out suddenly, his fingers brushing my collarbone as he examined the pendant. I froze at his touch, my pulse quickening. "This is packcraft," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "An old symbol of alliance. Where did your grandmother get this?" I swallowed hard. "She never said. Just that I should always wear it." He released the pendant but remained close, studying my face with newfound interest. "Your eyes," he murmured. "They're unusual for a human, almost like—" He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. You should eat and rest. Tomorrow the council will decide what to do with you." A young woman entered, carrying a tray of food and a pitcher. She kept her eyes downcast, placing the items on a small table near the fire before hurrying away. "Eat," Alexander commanded, gesturing toward the simple meal of bread, cheese, and what appeared to be venison stew. "I have matters to attend to. You'll sleep there." He nodded toward a small alcove containing a bed covered in furs. "Where will you sleep?" I asked before I could stop myself. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but something less severe than his usual expression. Concerned for my comfort, Evelyn Morris? I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Just trying to understand the arrangements." "I rarely sleep," he said, moving toward the door. "And when I do, it won't be tonight. I have a brother to mourn and hunters to find." He paused at the threshold. "The lodge is guarded. Don't attempt to leave." After he'd gone, I sat by the fire and forced myself to eat despite my churning stomach. The food was surprisingly good, the stew rich and flavorful, the bread freshly baked. I wondered about the community around me, about their lives and customs. They seemed simultaneously primitive and sophisticated, living close to nature yet with clear hierarchies and traditions. I was examining one of the wooden carvings on the mantel when I heard a soft scratching at the door. Tensing, I considered ignoring it, but the sound came again, more insistent. When I cautiously opened the heavy door, I found myself looking down at the small black wolf pup, his tiny body trembling with either cold or fear. "How did you get here?" I whispered, glancing around for any sign of Sophia or other werewolves. The pup whined and took a tentative step forward. "You shouldn't be here," I told him, even as I knelt down. "You'll get us both in trouble." He made that same soft yipping sound from earlier in the forest, then nudged my hand with his cold nose. "Fine," I sighed, glancing around once more before quickly ushering him inside. But just until someone realizes you're missing. The pup seemed to understand, trotting happily toward the fire and settling on the warm stone hearth. I sat beside him, tentatively reaching out to stroke his soft fur. He leaned into my touch with a contented sound. "You need a name," I mused. "I can't just call you Pup forever." I examined his midnight black coat and the distinctive white marking on his chest, shaped almost like a crescent moon. How about Shadow? Too obvious? Maybe Midnight? The pup gave a disapproving snort. I laughed softly. "Okay, not Midnight. What about Crescent? For your marking?" His ears perked up and he tilted his head as if considering. Then he gave a soft yip that I chose to interpret as approval. "Crescent it is, then," I said, continuing to stroke his fur. "Though I'm not sure your uncle the Alpha King will approve of me naming you." As if summoned by my words, the door swung open. Alexander stood there, his massive frame filling the entrance, eyes immediately finding the pup by the fire. "I should have known," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "He's imprinted on you." "Imprinted," I echoed, my hand freezing on the pup's fur. "What does that mean?" Alexander strode into the room, the door closing heavily behind him. "It means he's formed a bond with you. Unusual, but not unheard of. Sometimes wolf pups connect with those who help them in moments of extreme vulnerability." He crouched beside us, studying the small black wolf. "He should be with his brothers, yet he sought you out." "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't encourage him." He scratched at the door, and "I'm not accusing you," Alexander interrupted, surprising me with his measured tone. "He made a choice. Our youngest ones often have instincts that even we don't fully understand." Crescent, though I didn't dare use the name aloud, looked between us, then deliberately pressed closer to my side. Alexander reached out, running a hand over the pup's head in a gesture that seemed almost tender. "Damien's youngest," he murmured. "Always the most willful of the three." His eyes met mine. "You named him already, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. I just needed something to call him. "And what name did you choose for a prince of the pack?" My cheeks warmed under his penetrating gaze. "Crescent, because of the marking on his chest." Alexander was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my astonishment, he nodded. "Fitting, simple, but with meaning." He stood, towering over us once more. "He can stay with you tonight. It may help him rest, which he desperately needs." "Thank you," I whispered, relieved to avoid confrontation. "Don't thank me yet, Evelyn Morris," he replied, moving to stand by the fire. The flames cast his features into sharp relief, highlighting the tension in his jaw. "Your presence complicates matters that were already complex. The council will not look kindly on a human knowing our secrets, regardless of your assistance with the pups." "What will they do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Alexander stared into the flames. "Some will call for your death. The old laws are clear about humans who trespass." When I inhaled sharply, he continued. "Others might argue for memory alteration, a process that would remove all knowledge of us from your mind. But such magic is imprecise. It often takes more than intended." "And what will you argue for?" I dared to ask. His eyes shifted from the fire to my face. "I haven't decided." The casual way he discussed my fate sent a chill through me despite the fire's warmth. Crescent sensed my distress and pressed his small body against my leg, offering silent comfort. "You should sleep," Alexander said after a long silence. "Tomorrow will test you in ways you cannot imagine." I nodded mutely and rose, the pup following closely as I moved toward the alcove he'd indicated earlier. The bed, more a nest of furs than anything resembling my simple mattress at home, looked surprisingly inviting after the day's events. I settled onto it, and Crescent immediately curled against my side, his small body radiating surprising warmth. Alexander remained by the fire, his back to me, seemingly lost in thought. Despite my fear and uncertainty, exhaustion pulled at me relentlessly. The last thing I remembered before sleep claimed me was the silhouette of the Alpha King against the dancing flames, solitary and unmoving, a sentinel in the darkness. I dreamed of running through endless forests, of moonlight filtering through leaves, and of a silver wolf keeping pace beside me. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through high windows, and Crescent was still nestled against me, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. For a moment, I simply watched him sleep, marveling at how attached I'd grown to this small creature in such a short time. The sound of voices drew my attention to the main room. Alexander stood with 3 other werewolves, 2 men and a woman, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. I remained still, straining to hear their words. Unprecedented to allow a human to remain here, one of the men was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. Especially now, with hunters killing our kind. She found the heirs when we could not, Alexander replied evenly. That earns her some consideration, or perhaps it was too convenient, the woman suggested, her tone sharp with suspicion. How did she alone succeed where our best trackers failed? Maybe she works with the hunters. Sophia, Alexander's voice held a warning edge. You go too far. Do I? Your judgment has been compromised by grief, my king. First your brother, then your parents. Loss has made you reckless. I felt a flare of indignation on Alexander's behalf, surprised by my own reaction. The woman, Sophia, who had taken the pups last night, was clearly challenging his authority. Careful, the second man cautioned, his deep voice rumbling through the room. That borders on disrespect. The council convenes at midday, Alexander said, clearly ending the discussion. Your concerns will be heard then, Sophia. Until that time, the human remains under my protection. The 3 visitors departed, though not without Sophia casting a venomous glance toward the alcove where I pretended to sleep. When the door closed behind them, Alexander spoke without turning. You can stop pretending now. I know you're awake. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Crescent. They don't trust me. Would you, in their position? He countered, finally turning to face me. He looked weary, with dark shadows beneath his eyes confirming he hadn't slept, yet even exhausted, he radiated power and authority. Your timing was suspicious, your knowledge of our ways, unusual. I told you about my grandmother. Yes, your mysterious grandmother with her packed talisman. He approached the alcove, stopping a few feet away. What was her name? Margaret Morris, I replied, though everyone called her Maggie. Something flickered across his face. Recognition? And before that? Her maiden name? I frowned, uncertain why this mattered. Bennett, I think. Margaret Bennett. Alexander went very still. Bennett, he repeated quietly. I see. What does that mean? I pressed, growing frustrated with his cryptic behavior. Instead of answering, he gestured to a small table near the bed where fresh clothing had been placed. You'll need to change before the council. Your current attire is inappropriate. I glanced down at my dirt-stained jeans and torn sweater, remnants of yesterday's unexpected journey. Fine. But you haven't answered my question. Some answers must wait, he said, moving toward the door. I'll return shortly. The garments should fit well enough. After he'd gone, I examined the clothing. A simple dress of soft, dove-gray fabric with subtle embroidery at the collar and sleeves, and soft leather boots that looked handcrafted. They were beautiful in their simplicity, and nothing like the synthetic materials I was accustomed to wearing. Crescent woke as I dressed, stretching his small body with a yawn that revealed tiny, sharp teeth. He watched me curiously, head tilted to one side. What do you think? I asked him, smoothing the dress over my hips. Appropriate for a human-facing judgment? He gave a soft yip that I chose to interpret as approval. At least one of you seems to like me, I murmured, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. Though I'm not sure how much influence you have with the council. When Alexander returned, he paused momentarily upon seeing me in the pack clothing. Something unreadable passed through his eyes before his expression resumed its usual stoic mask. It suits you, he said simply, then gestured toward the main door. Come, it's time. Crescent immediately trotted to my side, clearly intending to accompany us. Alexander raised an eyebrow but didn't object. We exited the lodge to find the settlement buzzing with activity. Werewolves in various forms moved purposefully about their daily tasks, though all paused to watch as Alexander led me through the center of Wolf's Haven. I kept my head high despite the stares and whispers that followed us, drawing strength from Crescent's unwavering presence at my heels, and strangely enough, from Alexander walking beside me. Whatever his personal feelings toward humans, he had at least treated me with a measure of respect. We approached a structure that resembled an ancient amphitheater, a semicircle of stone seats surrounding a central speaking area. Already, dozens of werewolves were gathering, taking their places according to what appeared to be a predetermined hierarchy. Near the front sat 9 individuals on slightly elevated chairs, their posture and clothing marking them as leaders. "The Council of 9, Alexander explained quietly as we paused at the entrance. "Elders from each of the major bloodlines. They will hear your case and advise me on your fate." "And you?" I asked. "What's your role?" His mouth curved in a humorless smile. "I am Alpha King. Their advice holds weight, but the final decision is mine alone." That should have reassured me, but Alexander remained an enigma. I couldn't predict whether he would choose mercy or judgment. "Whatever happens," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "show no fear. Wolves respect strength, even in those they consider enemies." Before I could respond, he guided me forward into the amphitheater. A hush fell over the assembly as we walked to the center. Crescent stayed pressed against my leg, his small presence oddly comforting. Alexander left my side to take a position on a stone dais overlooking both the council and the wider assembly. In that moment, with his broad shoulders squared and his head held high, he truly looked like a king, remote, powerful, and absolute. "We gather today," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the space, "to address a breach of our borders and our ancient laws." His eyes found mine briefly before scanning the crowd. 3 days ago, human hunters murdered my brother, Prince Damien, and his mate, Princess Elena, violating the treaty that has kept peace between our kinds for generations. Murmurs of anger rippled through the assembly. "Yesterday," Alexander continued, "this human woman, Evelyn Morris, crossed our borders and found what our trackers could not: the royal heirs, hidden by their mother before her death." The murmurs shifted, becoming more complex. Surprise, suspicion, and curiosity mingling in the crowd. She fed them when they were starving. She showed kindness when she could have shown fear. His gaze settled on me again, intense and unreadable. Now we must decide her fate. Sophia stood from her place among the council. "My king, we must consider the timing. Humans murder our prince, and suddenly a human woman appears with access to the heirs? This cannot be coincidence." "I agree," said an elderly man with a deeply lined face. "The human must be connected to the hunters." "I'm not," I protested, finding my voice at last. "I didn't even know the Pups existed until yesterday. I'm a librarian, not a hunter." The assembly erupted in overlapping voices, some dismissing my claims, others arguing among themselves. Alexander raised a hand, and silence fell immediately. "The human will speak," he declared, "and you will listen." All eyes turned to me, dozens of gazes ranging from hostile to merely curious. Crescent pressed closer, and I drew strength from his silent support. "My name is Evelyn Morris," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've lived in Highland Falls my entire life. I respect the treaty and the boundaries it establishes." I touched my grandmother's pendant. "I was taught to honor the old agreements between our peoples. When I found the Pups, I only wanted to help them. I had no idea who they were or what had happened to their parents." The oldest member of the council, a woman with silver hair and piercing amber eyes, leaned forward. "You wear our symbol," she noted, gesturing to my pendant. "How did you come by it?" "It was my grandmother's," I explained. "Margaret Bennett Morris. She gave it to me before she died and told me to always wear it." A ripple of whispers passed through the council at the mention of my grandmother's maiden name. The elderly woman exchanged a meaningful glance with Alexander, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Bennett," she repeated, her voice carrying across the now silent amphitheater. "That name holds significance among our kind." My pulse quickened. "What significance?" Instead of answering, The elderly councilwoman turned to Alexander. "The pendant should be tested, my king." Alexander descended from the dais, approaching me with measured steps. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the wolf pendant. I nodded, and he reached out, his fingers brushing against my skin as he lifted the pendant. The metal seemed to warm at his touch, and to my astonishment, the etched wolf design began to glow with a faint blue light. Gasps echoed throughout the amphitheater. Alexander's expression remained controlled, but I caught a flicker of surprise in his eyes before he masked it. "Blood calls to blood," the elderly councilwoman announced. "The talisman recognizes pack magic." "Impossible," Sophia scoffed. "She's human." "Is she?" The elderly woman's gaze was penetrating as she studied me. "Maggie Bennett disappeared from our records 60 years ago. She was born to the Northern Pack, but left after the Great Schism. Some said she chose exile among humans." My mind reeled. "Are you suggesting my grandmother was a werewolf?" Alexander finished for me, still holding the glowing pendant. "And if she was, then you carry werewolf blood, however diluted." I shook my head in disbelief. "That's not possible. I would know if I—" "Not necessarily," the elderly councilwoman interrupted. "When our kind interbreeds with humans, the wolf gene often lies dormant for generations. It requires a catalyst to awaken. Extreme danger, proximity to powerful pack magic, or in rare cases, imprinting." All eyes moved to Crescent, who sat proudly beside me, seemingly unaware of the significance of what was transpiring. "The heir has chosen her," a male council member observed. Perhaps he sensed what we could not. Alexander released my pendant, his fingers lingering for a moment against my collarbone. "This changes matters considerably," he said, addressing the council but looking directly at me. "If Evelyn carries Bennett blood, she falls under pack protection by ancient law." "A convenient claim," Sophia muttered, though loud enough for all to hear. "We have only the pendant's reaction as proof, and magic can be deceived." The elderly councilwoman narrowed her eyes. "What would you suggest, Sophia? That we execute a potential pack member without certainty? That has never been our way." "I suggest caution," Sophia replied. "Keep her confined until we can be sure of her loyalties and her bloodline. The royal pups are too valuable to risk based on supposition." Alexander turned to face the assembly, his decision apparently made. "Evelyn Morris will remain in Wolf's Haven under my direct supervision until the truth of her heritage can be determined. She will not be treated as prisoner, but as a protected guest." His tone made it clear this was not a suggestion, but a decree. "Furthermore, given the heir's imprinting, she will assist in caring for the royal pups alongside their designated guardians." Sophia's face tightened with displeasure, but she offered no further objection. The other council members nodded in acceptance of Alexander's ruling. "This assembly is concluded," Alexander announced. "Return to your duties. The hunt for my brother's killers continues, and our borders will remain on high alert." As the werewolves dispersed, Alexander placed a hand at the small of my back, guiding me away from the amphitheater. Crescent trotted alongside us, seemingly pleased with the outcome. "You knew," I accused once we were out of earshot of the others. "You suspected who my grandmother was from the moment I mentioned her name." "I had suspicions," he admitted. "The Bennett line was known for its seers and healers. They could often sense things others could not. Like pups in danger, perhaps." My head spun with implications. "So, I'm part werewolf? Why didn't my grandmother ever tell me?" "To protect you, most likely." His expression softened fractionally. "Mixed bloods often face prejudice from both worlds, neither fully human nor fully wolf." We had reached a different building than his lodge, a smaller, stone structure with a thatched roof and windows filled with colored glass. When Alexander pushed open the door, I was greeted by the sight of all 3 wolf pups playing in a sunlit room under the watchful eye of an older woman. "Nara," Alexander addressed her. "This is Evelyn Morris. By my decree, she will assist with the care of the royal heirs." Nara studied me with keen interest, but no obvious hostility. "The human who found them. The pups have spoken of your kindness." At my startled expression, she smiled. "Yes, they communicate quite well, even before they master the shift, especially to those of us trained to listen." Crescent immediately bounded toward his brothers, engaging them in what appeared to be a wrestling match. The two russet-colored pups greeted him with enthusiasm before turning curious eyes toward me. "They're stronger today," I observed, relieved to see them playing with such energy. "Yes," Nara agreed. "They recover quickly, as the young do, but they still grieve. They know their parents are gone, even if they don't fully understand death." Alexander watched the pups with a somber expression. "They will learn all too soon what it means to lose family. For now, let them have their innocence." He turned to me. "You'll stay here with Nara. She will teach you what you need to know about caring for werewolf young. I have matters to attend to." "Alexander," I began, still struggling with all that had been revealed. "What happens if it's proven I have Bennett blood? What does that mean for me?" He studied me for a long moment. "It means you would have a place here, should you choose it." The Bennett line was respected, despite Maggie's choice to leave. His jaw tightened. "But it also means you would face new dangers. Those who hunt us would hunt you too, if your nature became known." With that sobering thought, he departed, leaving me with Nara and the 3 playful pups. Over the next few hours, she taught me about their dietary needs, their development stages, and the proper ways to handle young werewolves. Unlike many in the pack, she treated me with kindness, answering my endless questions with patience. "They should have their first shift within a year," she explained as we watched the pups nap in a pile of soft blankets. "Earlier than most because of their royal bloodline. Crescent may be first, despite being the smallest. He has a strong spirit. Will they remember being pups?" I asked, gently stroking Crescent's sleeping form. "Some memories will remain, like dreams," Nara replied. "Emotions, rather than specific events. But they will recognize those who cared for them, who showed them kindness or cruelty." Her eyes, wise and knowing, studied my face. "He imprinted on you because he sensed something in you, perhaps the dormant wolf blood, perhaps simply a kindred spirit." As evening approached, Alexander returned, his expression grave. "The hunters have been tracked to a camp 10 miles south," he announced to Nara. "I'm gathering a party to confront them tonight." "Be careful, my king," she cautioned. "Humans who know how to kill our kind are dangerous enemies." His eyes shifted to me. "Not all humans, it seems." My cheeks warmed under his gaze. "Will you kill them, the hunters?" "Justice must be served," he replied, his voice hardening. "They murdered my brother and his mate. Pack law demands retribution." "And human law?" I challenged. "The treaty works both ways, Alexander. If you kill humans, even guilty ones, without involving our authorities, you risk breaking the peace." His expression darkened. "Do not presume to lecture me on the treaty, Evelyn. I have lived with its restrictions for decades." "Then you know I'm right," I persisted, rising to face him. "If these hunters acted alone, punish them according to both our laws. But if they're part of something larger, killing them might prevent us from discovering who sent them or why." Alexander stared at me, surprise evident in his features. Few, I imagined, dared to speak to the Alpha King this way. For a tense moment, I thought I'd overstepped disastrously. Then, unexpectedly, his lips quirked in the ghost of a smile. "You have your grandmother's fire," he observed. "Maggie Bennett never hesitated to speak her mind either, even to my father." The comparison startled me into silence. Alexander turned to Nara. "The pups will sleep in my lodge tonight. All of them." His gaze returned to me. "As will you. If you're to be under my protection, I prefer to keep you close." I spent the rest of the evening helping Nara prepare the pups for the move to Alexander's lodge. By the time we arrived, the Alpha King had already departed with his hunting party, leaving strict instructions with the guards for our safety. The lodge felt emptier without his commanding presence, though no less imposing. Nara helped settle the pups in a small room adjoining the main chamber, constructing a nest-like bed of furs and blankets for them. "They sleep better together," she explained. "It helps them feel secure." After she left, I found myself alone with the 3 sleeping pups and my turbulent thoughts. I paced the great room, examining the artifacts and paintings that told the story of Alexander's lineage. What did it mean if I truly carried werewolf blood? Could I somehow awaken abilities that had lain dormant my entire life? The possibility both terrified and exhilarated me. Hours passed, and Alexander did not return. Eventually, exhaustion overcame my racing mind, and I settled into the bed of furs in the alcove. I had just begun to drift off when the door to the lodge burst open. Alexander stood there, his massive frame filling the doorway, blood streaking his face and bare chest, his eyes, wild with what could only be described as battle fury, fixed on me. "The hunters are dead," he announced without preamble, striding into the room, but they were not working alone. I sat up quickly. "What do you mean?" He threw something onto the table with a heavy thud, a metal object that gleamed dully in the firelight. This was found among their possessions. A seal bearing the insignia of Highland Falls' founding family. My blood ran cold as I recognized the emblem, a stylized tree with a sword through its trunk. "The Blackwoods," I whispered. "But that's impossible. They've upheld the treaty for generations." "Apparently no longer." Alexander's voice was deadly calm. "Which means you, Evelyn Morris, may be the only human I can trust. Tomorrow, you will help me understand what has changed in your town. Why the most powerful human family in the region would suddenly risk war with the pack." The implications were staggering. The Blackwoods controlled nearly everything in Highland Falls. The mayor answered to them, the police force was funded by them, and most businesses operated on land they owned. If they had decided to move against the werewolves, nowhere in town would be safe. "They'll be looking for me by now," I realized aloud. "My absence will have been noticed." Alexander's eyes, still bright with the aftermath of violence, fixed on mine. "Yes, and we will use that to our advantage." "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly uneasy about the calculated look in Alexander's eyes. He moved closer, his imposing frame illuminated by the flickering firelight. "Your disappearance creates an opportunity. The Blackwoods will assume either that you've been killed by wolves, or that you've discovered something they wish to keep hidden. Either way, they'll be nervous." He reached for a cloth on the table and wiped the blood from his face with methodical precision. "Nervous enemies make mistakes." "You want to use me as bait," I said flatly. "I want to use your knowledge of Highland Falls and its people. The fact that your absence will unsettle them is merely an additional advantage." He discarded the bloodied cloth and fixed me with an intense stare. "Unless you wish to protect those who ordered the death of innocent Pups' parents?" The accusation stung. "Of course not. But the Blackwoods aren't just any family. They've ruled Highland Falls for generations. They have resources, connections. And I have a pack of warriors who would die to avenge their prince," Alexander countered, "as well as a surprising ally with potential Bennett blood." The reminder of my possible heritage sent a shiver through me. "I'm still processing that part," I admitted. "It doesn't feel real." Something in his expression softened marginally. "I knew your grandmother, though I was very young when she left the pack. She was formidable, skilled in healing arts that combined human medicine with wolf magic. My father spoke of her with respect, even after her departure." "Why did she leave?" I asked, hungry for any information about this hidden part of my family history. Alexander moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. The official story was that she disagreed with pack policies, that she believed we should integrate more with the human world rather than remain separate. But there were rumors of a deeper reason, a vision she had that frightened even her. A vision. "The Bennett line produced seers," he explained. "Wolf-blooded with the ability to glimpse possible futures. Not all possessed the gift, but Maggie's was said to be uncommonly strong." He turned back to me. "Perhaps that's why she chose to live as human, why she never told you of your heritage. She may have seen something that made her believe it was safer." I thought of my quiet grandmother, who had taught me to respect the forest boundaries while simultaneously encouraging my independence. Had she known this moment would come? Had she prepared me in subtle ways I hadn't recognized? "What happens now?" I asked finally. "Now, you rest," Alexander replied. "Tomorrow, we begin to plan. If the Blackwoods are moving against the pack after centuries of peace, they must have a compelling reason. We need to discover what that is before more blood is spilled." He moved toward the door, clearly intending to leave again. "Where are you going?" I asked, surprised by my own reluctance to see him depart. "To check our defenses and brief the council. Recent events have made it clear that our borders are more vulnerable than we believed." He paused, studying me with those penetrating blue eyes. You're safe here, Evelyn. No one enters the Alpha's lodge without permission. After he left, I checked on the pups, finding all three still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the political machinations that would shape their future. Crescent had sprawled across his brothers, his small black form rising and falling with each breath. I gently stroked his fur, finding comfort in the simple contact. I'll protect you, I whispered, surprising myself with the fierce protectiveness I felt. Whatever happens, I'll keep you safe. Eventually, I returned to the alcove bed. But sleep eluded me. I lay awake, mind racing with everything I'd learned about my grandmother, about the Blackwood's betrayal, and about the increasingly complex Alpha King whose initial hostility had evolved into something more nuanced. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were filled with wolves running through moonlit forests and a pair of midnight blue eyes watching over me. I awoke to soft sunlight and the sensation of being watched. Opening my eyes, I found all three pups sitting beside my bed, their intelligent gazes fixed on me expectantly. Good morning to you too, I murmured, sitting up. Crescent immediately jumped onto the bed, nuzzling against my hand for attention. His brothers remained more reserved, but their wagging tails betrayed their excitement. Alexander's deep voice came from the doorway. They insisted on checking on you. Nara tried to keep them with her, but they were persuasive. I looked up to find him leaning against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. He had changed into fresh clothing, a simple black shirt and pants that nonetheless carried an air of authority. The blood and battle fury of the previous night were gone, replaced by cool calculation. They were worried about me? I asked, touched by the pup's concern. They formed an attachment, he confirmed, his expression thoughtful. Unusual, but not without precedent. Wolf pups sometimes bond with those who show kindness during formative moments. Crescent yipped in apparent agreement, causing me to smile despite the gravity of our situation. The two russet pups, emboldened by their brother's example, moved closer, allowing me to gently stroke their fur. Have you named the others as well? Alexander asked, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. I felt my cheeks warm. In my head, yes. The larger one with the white paws, I've been calling Russet. And the one with the darker ears is Ember. To my surprise, Alexander nodded approvingly. Simple names with meaning, as before. They suit them. He straightened from the doorway. Come. We have matters to discuss, and the council awaits. After a quick meal and ensuring the pups were settled with Nara, I followed Alexander to a smaller building adjacent to his lodge. Inside, the Council of Nine had already gathered around a large table covered with maps and documents. They fell silent at our entrance, several members eyeing me with lingering suspicion. Counselors? Alexander acknowledged them, taking his place at the head of the table. He gestured for me to sit beside him, a move that clearly surprised the others. Evelyn will provide insight into Highland Falls and the Blackwood family. She has agreed to help us understand why they have broken the treaty. The elderly councilwoman from the previous day, whose name I'd learned was Elder Thea, nodded approvingly. Wise. Who better to interpret human motives than one who has lived among them, if she can be trusted? Sophia muttered, though with less venom than before. The pendant has confirmed her Bennett blood, Elder Thea reminded her sharply. And the heir has imprinted on her. That should be proof enough of her allegiance. Alexander raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. Evelyn's loyalty is not in question. Now, to the matter at hand. He turned to me. Tell us about the Blackwoods. What would drive them to act against the pack now, after centuries of upholding the treaty? All eyes turned to me, and I took a deep breath. The current head of the family is Jonathan Blackwood. He inherited control 5 years ago when his father died unexpectedly. Jonathan has always been ambitious, more interested in expansion than his predecessors. Recently, there have been rumors of financial troubles, though nothing confirmed. What kind of expansion? Asked a council member I didn't recognize. Mining, primarily, I replied. The mountains to the north supposedly contain rare earth minerals used in technology. The Blackwoods have been buying up land in that direction for years. Alexander's eyes narrowed. The Northern Territories border our lands. If they sought to expand mining operations into areas protected by the treaty, it would explain why they needed to eliminate those who would defend the borders most fiercely, Elder Thea finished grimly, including the prince and his mate, who patrolled the northern boundaries. The implications settled heavily over the room. Greed, simple human avarice, had led to murder and threatened a peace that had lasted generations. "There's more," I said quietly. Jonathan's daughter, Victoria, recently returned from studying abroad. She brought with her a group of research associates who've been conducting surveys in the forest. The town council approved it because the Blackwoods claimed it was environmental research, but you suspect otherwise, Alexander prompted. I nodded. They carry equipment that doesn't look like environmental monitoring tools, and they're armed, not just for protection against wildlife. The council exchanged concerned glances. Alexander's jaw tightened, the muscle there jumping with tension. A hunting party disguised as researchers, he concluded. Looking for weaknesses in our defenses, perhaps even searching for the royal heirs. His gaze met mine. Your insights are valuable, Evelyn. More than I anticipated. The unexpected praise warmed me, though I tried not to show it. What will you do? We will strengthen our borders and gather more intelligence, he replied. But we must be strategic. Open conflict with humans would draw unwanted attention from beyond Highland Falls. The existence of our kind remains hidden from the wider world, and we must keep it that way. For the next hour, the council debated various approaches, from diplomatic outreach to preemptive strikes against the Blackwoods operations. Throughout it all, Alexander remained composed yet resolute, weighing each suggestion with careful consideration. I found myself admiring his leadership, the way he balanced caution with decisive action, the respect with which he treated even dissenting voices. Eventually, he arrived at a decision. We will send envoys to the human authorities beyond Highland Falls, state officials who are not under Blackwood influence. We will provide evidence of their treaty violations and their murders. Simultaneously, we will increase patrols along the northern border and evacuate vulnerable pack members to our southern territories. He turned to me once more. And you, Evelyn, will help us compose a message that will resonate with human authorities. Your understanding of both worlds makes you uniquely qualified. You're trusting me with this? I asked, surprised by the responsibility. His eyes held mine steadily. Yes, I am. The council meeting adjourned, and Alexander walked with me back toward his lodge. The settlement buzzed with activity as pack members prepared for potential conflict. Yet there was no panic, only purposeful determination. Your people trust you completely, I observed. They trust the office of Alpha King, he corrected. It is my responsibility to be worthy of that trust. He paused, looking out over Wolf's Haven. My brother would have handled this differently. With more diplomacy, perhaps less force. He was always the wiser of us. You're doing what you believe is right to protect your people, I said softly. That's all any leader can do. He glanced at me, a hint of surprise in his expression. You defend me now? When days ago you feared me? I'm beginning to understand you better, I admitted, and you're not the monster I first thought. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No? Perhaps you simply haven't seen the monster clearly enough. Or perhaps there's more to you than you show most people. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the northern watchtower. A wolf in human form was running toward us, his expression urgent. My king, he called. Humans approach the border. They bear white flags, a sign for parley. Alexander's posture immediately tensed. How many? 3, the messenger replied. One identifies himself as Jonathan Blackwood. He claims to seek peaceful resolution and... The messenger hesitated, and he asks specifically for Evelyn Morris. My blood ran cold. They know I'm here. Alexander's eyes darkened dangerously. So it seems. The question is why Blackwood would risk coming himself rather than sending subordinates. It could be a trap, I warned. Undoubtedly, Alexander agreed. Yet it also presents an opportunity. His gaze met mine, calculating and intense. Are you willing to face him, with me at your side? We may learn more from this meeting than weeks of intelligence gathering. I touched my grandmother's pendant, drawing strength from the connection to my newly discovered heritage. Yes, I replied with more confidence than I felt. I'll face him. Alexander's hand closed briefly over mine, warm and reassuring. Together then. Wolf and human, as it should have always been. As we walked toward the northern border to confront the man who had ordered the death of innocent werewolves, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I had arrived as a prisoner, terrified and alone. Now, I moved as an ally, with the Alpha King at my side and wolf pups who had claimed me as their own. Whatever future awaited, whatever awakening might come from my dormant Bennett blood, I would face it not as the invisible woman of Highland Falls, but as someone who had finally found her place between two worlds.